Thank you so much to that stellar panel and Yolanda Bevel for her thoughtful moderation. I'm Pamela Toney, President of CSU Global. CSU Global is the first fully online accredited state university in the nation. We are proud to be a leader in helping modern learners achieve academic and professional success through our future-facing programs and exceptional student support that provide a superior online learning experience. It is that focus on innovation, problem solving, and career advancing knowledge and skills that makes me so excited to be part of today's event along with our students, stakeholders, and the larger CSU community. Finding solutions and paths forward that make a difference in the lives of those around us. As many of you know, one of the goals of the Water in the West Symposium is to bring together perspective on water from different sectors. These diverse viewpoints help us to see where we have common challenges and goals and work together to find solutions. Solutions that we might not see if we stay in our silos. In that spirit, it is my pleasure to introduce the final segment of today's program. Tom Vilsack, former U.S. Secretary of Agriculture and Governor of Iowa, and current CEO of the U.S. Dairy Export Council and advisor to the CSU system. He will be hosting a conversation with Karen Ross, Secretary of California's Department of Food and Agriculture, and David LaFrance, the CEO of the American Water Works Association. I'm looking forward to hearing their perspectives. Over to you, Secretary Vilsack.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Tom Vilsack, and I've got the great opportunity of being the host of this terrific panel that has brought together two leaders in agriculture and in water policy. Certainly great to have Secretary Karen Ross, who is the current Secretary of Agriculture for the state of California, and someone that I know well, having had the opportunity to work with her at USDA when she was my chief of staff. Joining Karen is David LaFrance, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the American Water Works Association, which is obviously dedicated to working on water issues for municipal utilities that are operating waterworks throughout the United States. So it's great to have both of you today. And we have a very short period of time, so I'm just going to dive right into the questions, and I'm going to start with you, Secretary Ross. You know, I think you obviously understand, coming from California as the #1 state in the country for agriculture, how important agriculture is to California and how important water is to agriculture. And no doubt you have to speak to a number of different audiences about the importance of agriculture and water. Tell us a little bit about the story you tell and advice that you would give to those here in Colorado and in the West as to how to tell the story effectively to their audiences.
Well, thank you, Secretary Vilsack, and it's good to see you. It's challenging in a state of 40 million people that are predominantly living in urban areas. And it's easy for us in agriculture to just plunge right into the numbers because they're impressive. 400 commodities, 8 million acres of irrigated agriculture, the numbers of jobs that we create, the value of it, and that's really important. But if you can't connect that to something that's real and relevant to their daily life, and being able to tell the story of how unique California agriculture is because of our high value specialty crops, and why we grow more almonds than any place else because we're one of the few places in the world that can grow almonds, and really tying that story to their daily life, and that what matters to them is starting on our farm. And that also came in handy when we had to make these hard decisions around COVID and who were essential workers. It's about the daily lives of our consumers and the health and nutrition that we're providing for them. So I really encourage everyone to think about, who are you speaking to and why should this matter to them, instead of, I want you to know how important we are and how valuable we are. We have to make it real for their daily lives.
Well, that's very good advice. And David, you have got a tremendous responsibility across the country working with utilities that provide water resources. And I was struck by your mission statement at the American Water Works Association, where you basically point out that water is one of, if not the most, it's certainly one of the most important and vital resources that we have. My sense is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong about this, but my sense is that a lot of us take water for granted. We turn on the tap, we just assume it's always going to be there. And I'm sure that you must confront that attitude as well. given the fact that you've got so many challenges related to water, I'm interested in your advice that you could have to give to us today on how we might elevate the importance of the understanding of the importance of water that is played in all of our lives, but particularly in the lives of folks who may not be as connected to water as farmers and ranchers and producers are. What advice would you have for us?
Well, thank you for that. And it is certainly a pleasure to join both of you for this important conversation. It is true, water touches people every single day. It's usually one of the first things they do is they brush their teeth, take a shower. So they're using water right as soon as they get up and every day. But it's also true that historically, at least in recent history, water's been taken for granted. So this vital product that influences our daily life, how do you elevate it through making people aware? And we do a few things. COVID has certainly helped to make the population aware of it. But some simple things we do, like I've got my coffee mug here. Every day, people are using water to make coffee or tea with their breakfast. And we just try to connect, sort of like Nancy talked about, connect people to the importance of it on a daily life. So we have campaigns that say, no water, no coffee, no water, no beer. That one really, people love that. As it relates to, we launched a campaign during COVID, which was no water, no hygiene, because, the prevalence of hand washing and water is a PPE became really important for all the communities that the over 50,000 water utilities serve. Another thing we do, but again, the theme is to connect people to the importance of water, is we partner with some other associations and we celebrate a day, which seems actually like not a celebration, but it's celebrating a day without water. Imagine a day without water. And there's a lot of social media events. So it's just a way of elevating the importance of water in our communities and making people really think about how this vital resource changes everything. And Tom, actually, ranchers and farmers are really good water stewards. They know a lot about how water affects their daily life. AWWA, our focus is a little bit more urban, municipal, and municipal in the rural communities, but ranchers and farmers are really good water stewards.
Dave, let me just follow up on that comment that you made about dedicating a day to what would life be like without water. Give us a sense of how you do that. What do you show on social media? How do you get young people in particular interested and perhaps engaged in watching whatever it is you're promoting? What's the message? What's the specific message? How do you convey it?
So there's a lot of different messages. Young people are great at it because they're a little bit more naturally in tune in the social media parts than us more seasoned professionals, if you will. But there's a lot of the simple connections of things like no water, no coffee, no water, no beer. There's more elaborate messages where people will use social media to thank water professionals or to display the real connections of things like what happens when there might be a main break, or how does your water utility have heroes who are serving you every single day, so that you don't have to imagine a day without water. There's also some international exposure where there are communities around the globe who don't have to imagine a day without water because they have days without water. So these are really important messages, again, elevating the day-to-day usage of water and what it means to us individually, personally, emotionally, physically, and for the economy. There isn't a business in any of our communities that don't depend on water.
Secretary Vilsack, if I could just add something to that,
Sure.
To a real story that really helped connect our Southern California friends to our drought situation in our second year, going into our third year of our 5-year drought. And that was a front page picture of a dam in Northern California that was almost completely drained. And a story about that was one of the suppliers of water to the 25 million Californians that live south of there. And for some reason, that one graphic just went viral. but it connected people to something that was happening far away. But I also, Day Zero was a campaign that Cape Town ran when they were in their severe drought, because they calculated if they could not get their middle and upper class to practice conservation practices, they knew exactly when the water would be gone. And they used Day Zero and a countdown clock, and it just helped drive conservation practices. So there's so many unique ways of being able to make these connections so that people feel like I can do something about that.
Well, you both have made comments that tie very nicely into the opening statement and keynote discussion that Gary Nell gave to us, outlining the importance of visually communicating the message and connecting it in ways that are relevant and understandable for folks.
Yeah.
You know, as you both talked, it occurred to me that you are both operating really important jobs, complicated jobs, every day with challenges within the job that you have. And now we're overlaying on top of that a pandemic. And so I think it'd be interesting to know, how has this pandemic impacted and affected your day-to-day activities at the work that you do? And how do you essentially balance or create the balance between focusing on a crisis which is imminent and real and in real time, but at the same time fixing that water main that breaks, which happens every single day as well? How do you balance it? Give us a little sense of that, of your day-to-day activities. Karen, let's start with you.
Okay, all right. So first of all, you have to have great people, because obviously we can't do this alone. And you have to have trust across cabinet, because we're all working together in ways that we've not had to on a daily basis. We have been in emergency response mode with daily unified command calls since February. And then we added in the pandemic wildfires on top of that, power shutdowns on top of that, and heat stress days on top of that. So it's people, it's trust, and being able to say, this is what I have to focus on now, because if we fail at this, nothing else we do is really going to matter. This is when people need to know and have confidence in their government, and getting through these kinds of emergencies is what we have to do. But in this, we've been able to, because of how we do collaborate in a very integrated way across all of cabinet, we call it all of government response. It also has allowed us to be able to, once we knew what our plans were, what the response was, where the delegations were going to be, it did allow us to continue doing things like our work on economic recovery, our work on climate, and we've been doing magnificent work on climate, and on water. We released our water resiliency portfolio. We are doing the implementation of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, because it really forces you to look at all the people and all the places that you have data and systems to be able to continue moving forward on key things that cannot stop while you're focused on an emergency. But if it weren't for the people that we have and the ability to delegate and the trust we have to work across cabinet to achieve what we know needs to be done, absolutely has to be done, we as an individual would not be able to do it.
Yeah,
Well, that's a good
Tom,
point.
I
David,
would
how about from your perspective?
A lot of what Karen just, I would echo a lot of what Karen just talked about, really about the people, sort of the heroic acts of the people who are serving water every day. You know, when we all started sheltering in place and people were frantically searching for toilet paper, they didn't have to worry about whether there'd be water at the tap, right? And water utilities did have to have their staff working remotely, relying on technology just as we are for this conference. And yet they also had to have people on site. And to protect them, many of the utilities had their staff shelter in place at the treatment plant or shelter in place at various parts in the water system. So those heroes were people who were leaving their families so that they could protect all of our families. And that's just such a tribute and reflection on the dedication of water utility professionals. The other thing is water utilities across North America, without any prompting, without any direction from the US EPA saying thou shalt do this or do that, uniformly and within like 2 weeks of each other. And I don't know how this happened. It's such a unique phenomenon. Immediately started forgiving late payments and turnoffs for late payments so that people could continue to get water for their personal hygiene, again, to protect them from COVID and make sure that they could stay clean, even if they couldn't pay. And that just kind of goes to the sort of community aspects of water utilities and how they embrace their role as a community steward. The third thing, though, I'd say is that act does come with some financial realities for utilities, which they're now trying to address. And how do they, how do they recover costs that they went without, and how do they balance their budgets and make sure that they continue to provide the right service to their communities. But they did the right thing, very proud of that as well. And at the same time, they now are having to work through some difficult issues.
Speaking of some difficult issues, David, I was struck when I looked at your website about the statements that are made on your website relating to racial injustice and the importance of inclusion and diversity. This is a bit apart from water issues, but to a certain extent, water issues do impact minority populations. Yes. Talk a little bit about what you're doing to be sensitive to that, and what advice you would give to folks who may be associated with government or utilities watching this webinar today and this symposium today about how sensitive even a municipal utility association needs to be to this issue of racial justice.
Yeah, this is a great question. It's affecting the water and water sector and all of us, really. Sort of a new or a revised awakening to the importance of addressing these particular issues. It's important for the water sector. AWWA has just done a brand new strategic plan. We've always talked about diversity and inclusion. A lot of that had to do with membership of AWWA, but we've changed that phrasing to be advancing diversity and inclusion. And by that, what we mean is sort of leaning into it for our members to help with providing them with solutions on how they can address it. Sort of the good news for water utilities is 80% of the population thinks their water service is great, excellent to great. But when you dive into those statistics, what you see is that Black and Hispanic communities have less trust or less confidence in their water systems than the average folks who we're serving. So a lot of this work has to be done at the local level. What AWWA does is we try to provide some tools. The idea of being community stewards, we have this guide that we produced just recently. You can find it on our website, but it really talks about how water utilities as community stewards, meaning creating fairness and equity across all demographics in the communities that they serve, how water is a critical part of that, and how there are certain tactics and strategies that a water utility can implement to make sure we improve that fairness, that equity. Maybe just other things I'd highlight. A big topic here is affordability. Water is incredibly valuable. The price is often spoken of being way below the value, and historically has been measured at the median household income about whether or not it's affordable. But the truth is, if you have affordability issues at the median, then you've got 50% of your population that has an affordability issue. So we're making steps and strides to recalibrate where affordability needs to be measured and how you might address that either through creative rate making, through customer assistance programs, or other sort of community programs to make sure that water is affordable for everyone. The other,
I'm sorry.
One other thing is how you develop a water system and how a community develops and changes over time, and making sure that there's good infrastructure serving everyone equally. These are important things for addressing these particular issues. It really hit home for the water utilities when Flint, Michigan was in the press, was the crisis that it was. And so this really helped awaken water utilities to the importance of this issue.
Excellent points. Karen, where does this issue of racial injustice and discrimination and inclusion and diversity, where does it intersect in your world?
Well, the most direct intersection is the makeup of our workforce, which is largely Latinx, and farm workers live in some of our poorest communities. Many of them are unincorporated areas. They may have their own water system. And so this all started for us. Flint helped deliver legislation that Governor Brown signed about 8 years ago, that water is a human right, and really set up our accomplishments around establishing a safe drinking water fund, and some authority to do consolidations where they made the most sense, but really start to fix something that had been a structural issue for quite some time. And racism is something that has just been laid bare in COVID because of the disproportionate hit to Black and color communities of color, excuse me. It's just, we created a health equity index, and that dictates how we can reopen our economy, because those communities, if they are not recovering, the rest of us will not be able to recover. So we have to drive that. And so that's really been an awakening. But I think what really struck me through all of this, Governor Newsom came in on a platform of a California for all. And it's great, and we really meant it. But having COVID in the second year of his term made it so much more real for each one of us, and to feel what was happening, that there was COVID, and then we started with some of the killings that we saw, and how to have the conversations. Fortunately, we have our first cohort at the department that's going through what is GARE, which is the government, what is it called? The Government Alliance for Racial Equity. This is deep training about implicit bias, that we become aware of that and then give us the skills to talk about it. So we're starting to train our own employees about that, because we're out in the field all the time and we're dealing with all different kinds of communities. And you want to give people the skills to be able to understand that, be aware about it, and learn about it. This came through in our economic recovery. We have some really talented people who are some of the nation's top researchers on what's happening with implicit bias and equity issues. And they really work with our top business leaders who are on the governor's economic recovery task force. And in one of the meetings, when Manuel Pastor was citing some of the numbers, and Angela Glover Blackwell, who created Policy Link, really laid bare what this was about. And the president of our Chamber of Commerce said, look, we know we need to talk about it. We don't necessarily know how to have those kinds of difficult conversations. I welcome the sunshine on this issue. We have a new diversity, inclusion, and equity committee. I'm very proud that with the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture, which has an MOU with minorities in agricultural, natural resources, and related sciences, which you know well because some of the best people at USDA are alumni of that. We now have an MOU with Manners, and California is a pilot with them. We just kicked off our project yesterday. They spoke to our State Board of Food and Agriculture, and I told them I have modest goals. I want them all to get passionate about serving in public policy and CDFA and my sister agencies. I want them to tap into a network of wonderful employers to help us really bring them to the forefront of exciting career opportunities. And three is, and I want to grow their chapters throughout California. So those are pretty modest goals that I laid before them.
Lots of work to do. Hey, speaking of lots of work to do, we're talking about water and talking about some of the challenges that you have to do on a day-to-day basis. But, we've got this issue of climate change that is sort of out there. It's not one of those issues unless you're in the midst of a horrific fire season or a drought that necessarily makes people conscious of what's happening. But talk to me a little bit about where you see us headed on climate, how it impacts water, how you essentially get people to focus on an issue that doesn't necessarily intersect day to day as it would if your water main breaks or if you're in the midst of a forest fire that might burn down your house. How do you, where do you see the opportunities? Where do you see the challenges? How are you handling this issue of climate in your day-to-day activities?
I'm happy to start on that because it's been
Okay.
a big part of my life since day one with Jerry Brown, who had a very keen focus on this. But I was also lucky to know the good work that you were doing at USDA around climate smart agriculture. And so we really have incorporated ag and using our cap and trade dollars to invest in agriculture for its transition to a carbon neutral economy. And so we've established programs that were based on the science and the trusted source that our farmers know about, which is the Natural Resource Conservation Service and their programs. So we also established a consortium to just listen to farmers, how they were talking and thinking about climate change. This would have been 10 years ago. And if they were thinking about that, and it was really around adaptation. And so we created a roadmap around that to inform our research community about that. But the shift has come because of our 5-year drought and then the multiple wildfire seasons that we've had to really agriculture as part of mitigation. And this awesome, exciting opportunity to sequester carbon, to be part of the drawdown, to really be a part of the solution, and to watch that being incorporated into our scoping plan under natural working lands and all that is possible for that drawdown to happen with our practices and our land stewardship, and to watch this taking off across the country throughout all of American agriculture. When we passed a policy at our National Association a year ago, colleagues came to me and said, thank you for writing this in a way that's about, here's what we can do, not what we're opposed to. And never has this been more important because we're talking the day after our withdrawal from the Paris Accord has happened. That I believe the business and the focus on sustainable sourcing, just within the food supply and its own standing, is going to drive this in ways that government can send policy signals, which we do in California, but I see business and humanity. And I will close with, our young people are not going to let us slip on this one. We've offered them a burden of responsibility as it is. They're going to hold us accountable to make sure that we do everything that we possibly can.
Good point. David, from your perspective, what keeps you up at night about climate? What are you doing about it? Where do you see the opportunity?
A couple of similar themes to Karen, the importance of sustainability and the next generations, making sure that we have the sustainable environmental systems to keep providing water. The West is intimate with climate change and how do water utilities adapt to what climate change brings to us. Whether runoff comes off early, Colorado being a headwater state, all the water runs out of Colorado. Yes. We're one of only 2 states in the nation. The other one is Hawaii, where all the water runs out of it. But I have a couple personal connections to it, which might be worth the listeners' time. So in 2002 through 2006, Colorado had its historic drought. I happened to have been the CFO for Denver Water at that time. At the same time, we had what is now the 5th largest wildfire, the Hayman Fire, which disrupted the watershed for Denver Water and several other communities and brought ash and soot into the water system. So out of that has come some important lessons. There's a whole movement of forest to tap, which basically says you need to partner with a variety of other stakeholders in the forest for protection of your watershed. And it's really a place where a utility can't do it by themselves. They need the partnerships of others. And then at the tap, if you take these steps up at the forest in the watershed, then you'll have better water at your tap at lower cost because you won't have to leverage the treatment plants quite as much, and your source water will be better and cleaner. Now this year in 2020, Colorado has 4 new larger fires than the Hayman fire. And it has been a function of the beetle kill that we had, and that has caused rapid fire growth. The aptly named East Troublesome Fire grew at 6,000 acres per hour. And so there's more to do for all of us, but in particular in Colorado where I live, there's more to do on this forest to tap process.
Yes.
And how we are climate resilient. It is important because there is so much of our economy and our way of life that depends on water management with data, information, the use of technology, so that we can keep providing the vital services that we provide.
Well, I want to take this opportunity to thank both of you for taking time from incredibly busy schedules with all that you've just outlined in the short time we've had together here. You've got a lot on your plate, and certainly water issues are incredibly important. I take away from your comments today, the importance of elevating an understanding of the role that water plays in each of our lives day to day, and also the importance of partnerships, of working collaboratively together to address some of the challenges that we face with water specifically, and as it relates to climate, as it relates to the role it plays in this pandemic, and as it relates to essentially justice and equity issues. Certainly have raised a lot of good questions and good ideas today. So I want to thank you very much on behalf of Colorado State University for participating in today's symposium.
Thank you. It was fun.
Thanks for having us. Go Rams.